Shalom everyone, and welcome to Reboot the Root. In this series of teachings, we're going to be looking at the story of Hanukkah. In fact, we're going to be rebooting the story of Hanukkah, giving us an educated understanding of what Hanukkah is through the book of 1st Macabees. So join me, if you will, as we reboot the root and reboot the story of Hanukkah. Shalom. Shalom and welcome to this episode of Reboot the Root, where we're continuing to reboot Hanukkah. And so we're going through the history books contained in the book of Maccabees, and we're trying to find out what we can know about the story of Hanukkah. And so this is episode 7. And we're continuing on with the Hanukkah story by looking in the book of 1st Maccabees. So last time we were talking about in 1st Maccabees chapter 2, verses 52 through 60, where Mattahias is recounting the acts of the fathers of Israel. And so he's recounting the acts of Abraham, Joseph, Phinehas, the high priest, Joshua, and Caleb, and David, and Elijah, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel. And so we see this recountance in 1st Maccabees chapter 2, verse 51, where it says, "Call to remembrance what acts our fathers did in their time." And so that verse kind of speaks into our time. It comes into the future and speaks to us, to say to us how we can recall the story of Hanukkah to recount the story and revolt of the Maccabees, and what it did to bring freedom to our people, to recount and remembrance of what happened back in the 2nd century BC, of how our fathers, our ancestors, our brothers, they rose up and rebelled against the Greek invasion. And so this is what Hanukkah does. In remembering what the acts of our fathers did, Hanukkah reminds us of the struggle that the Maccabees faced, and they in turn are reminded of the struggle before them. So how many times can we recount over the thousands of years of humanity what people did before us? Before we arrived, what did people do to be able to acquire our freedom? Okay? Continue on in 1st Maccabees chapter 1st Maccabees 2:62 through 64, it says, "Fear not then the words of a sinful man, for his glory shall be dung and worms. Today he shall be lifted up, and tomorrow he shall not be found, because he returned into his dust, and his thought is come to nothing. Therefore, ye my sons, be valiant, and show yourselves men in the behalf of the law, for by it shall you obtain glory." Continuing on, 66 through 68, it says, "And as for Judas Maccabeus, he hath been mighty and strong, even from his youth up. Let him be your captain, and fight the battle of the people. Take also unto you all those that observe the law, and avenge ye the wrong of your people. Recompense fully the heathen, and take heed to the commandment of the law." And finishing up in 69 and 70, it says, "And so he blessed them and was gathered to his fathers, and he died in the 146th year, and his sons buried him in the sepulchres of his fathers at Modin, and all Israel made great lamentation for him. So this is all talking about in preparation for Mattahias to pass on. He dies, and he passes on the legacy of the rebellion to his son Judas Macabees, and so he is telling him that Judas Macabees, he is mighty and he is strong, and he is commissioning him to lead the revolt, to lead the rebellion, and to continue the fight and the battle for the Jewish people. And so he's also commissioning those that are listening to this, saying, for all those who observe the law, avenge the wrong that has been done to the Jewish people, and repay back unto the heathen, and take heed the commandments of the law. So he is giving them his sort of his deathbed blessing. He is commissioning the people who are listening to this word to continue the fight, in the battle against the pagans, against the heathens, against the Greeks, against the invasion, against the onslaught against the law. And so he is commissioning his son Judas Macabees, to continue the fight and to continue on in the role of the captain of the Maccabees. And so when we find a little discovery, a little study, if you will, about who Matthias is, we find that perhaps he was a priest, maybe the high priest. And we find that that in the book of Maccabees, he was indeed a priest, but we don't know what kind of a priest he was. He might have been a high priest, but we know that he descends from Phineas, who was a high priest. And so Matthias, he dies in 166 BC, which is the 146th year in the reign of the Seleucid Greeks. So the leadership of this Maccabean revolt that Matthias had started is given to Judah or Yehuda, his third son. Matthias encourages his sons to not relent in their fight against Seleucids. So this particular passage that we read in 1 Maccabees 2:62 through 70 is an encouragement to his sons to continue on the fight that he began. And he encourages his sons not to relent, not to give up, not to lose heart, faint not, but to continue the fight against the Seleucids. He says, avenge ye the wrong of your people. And so he's continuing this heart and this mindset of recompensing fully the heathen and take heed to the commandments of the law. It is this idea that we have to fight for the Torah, which is what got them into this situation of being rebels, to being rebel fighters, is that we're sticking up, we're standing up, we're making a stand against those who would want to oppress God's law. And 1 Maccabees 3:1 says, and then his son Yehuda or Judas called Maccabeus rose up in his stead. So Judas Maccabeus, Yehuda Maccabeus, that is, he rose up to take his father's place, to continue on the rebellion of the Maccabees, to formulate the Hanukkah story. So let's take a look now at who Yehuda Maccabeus or Judas was. Judas or Judah or Yehuda in Hebrew, he is fully named as Yehuda Maccabeus, which later on they become known as the Maccabees. Okay, and we already discovered and we already identified to you that he is Matthias's third son and was named captain of the rebels. And from that point on, the fighters that would fight with Judah or Yehuda would become known as the Maccabees. Okay, perhaps Judas was also a priest like his father, Matthias, and later on in the fighting techniques of of Judah, Yehuda, and the Maccabees, Judas became known as the hammer. And so we need to know, why was he called the hammer? Well, let's take a look at that in the Wikipedia article entitled Judas Maccabeus. It says, in the early days of the rebellion, Yehuda received a surname Maccabee, and several explanations have been put forward for this surname. One suggested is that the name derives from the Aramaic Maccabah, Macabet in modern Hebrew, or hammer or sledgehammer. So the original Hebrew called Macabet may have given rise to his name Macabeus. It is also possible that the name Maccabee is an acronym for the Torah verse Mi Kamoka Ba'alim Adonai, which says, who among the gods is like you, O Adonai? This would possibly be his battle cry to motivate the troops. In 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verse 4 through 7, we move on, and it says, in his acts he was, and we're talking about Yehuda Maccabeus, his acts he was like a lion, and like a lion's whelp roaring for his prey. For he pursued the wicked and sought them out, and burnt up those that vexed his people. Wherefore the wicked shrunk for fear of him, and all the workers of iniquity were troubled, because salvation prospered in his hand. He grieved also many kings, and made Jacob, or Jacob, glad with his acts. And so this Jacob here refers to Israel. Made Jacob glad with his acts, and his memorial is blessed forever. According to the article Wikipedia, Judas Maccabeus, it continues to tell us some pearls of wisdom here. It says, mindful of the superiority of Seleucid forces during the first 2 years of the revolt, Yehuda's strategy was to avoid any engagement with the regular army and to resort to guerrilla warfare in order to give them a feeling of insecurity. Continuing on with 1 Maccabees, verse 3, 10 through 12, it reads, then Apollonius gathered the Gentiles together and a great host out of Samaria to fight against Israel. Which thing when Judas perceived, he went forth to meet him, and so he smote him and slew him. Many also fell down slain, but the rest fled. Wherefore Judas took their spoils, and Apollonius' sword also, and therewith he fought all his life long. So looking up to about the Maccabeans' battle with the Samaritans, we go to Josephus, a Jewish historian, in his book, The Antiquities of the Jews, and it reads, when Apollonius, the general of the Samaritan forces, heard this, he took his army and made haste to go against Judas, who met him and joined battle with him, and beat him and slew many of his men, and among them Apollonius himself, their general, whose sword, being that which he happened then to wear, he seized upon and kept for himself, but he wounded more than he slew, and took a great deal of prey from the enemy's camp, and went on his way. So looking at who Apollonius was, we find that Apollonius is a common Syro-Macedonian name, and he was the governor of Colé, Syria, which is Palestine, Phoenicia, under Seleucus Philopator. And so Apollonius, he was the governor of Samaria in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, and he was slain in battle by Judas Maccabeus. And looking at the area of Samaria, when we're talking about the Samaritans, Samaria is located in between Galilee, by the Sea of Galilee, and Judea. And so Judea would contain Jerusalem. And so when we look at the New World Encyclopedia talking about Samaria, we see it says, Samaria was the capital of the ancient kingdom of Israel. It was also the name of the administrative district surrounding the city under late Greek and Roman administrations. and it's referring to the mountainous region between the Sea of Galilee to the north and Judea to the south. So if you see here on the map I got on the screen, it would have been located between the Sea of Galilee and Judea. So Samaria is between Galilee and Jerusalem. And so this type of map would have been current at the time of the divided kingdom. And so the divided kingdom is in reference to when Israel was divided into northern and southern kingdoms. Continuing to talk about Samaria from a source called Ancient Origins, it talks about the city reemerged during the Persian period and after the conquest of Alexander the Great, and it was garrisoned by Macedonian soldiers. So if you remember Alexander the Great, he came from the land of Macedonia. Samaria was badly damaged when it was conquered and devastated by the Maccabees, but was later repopulated by Herod the Great and remained the capital of Samaria. So, continuing on in 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verses 13 through 15, it reads, Now when Saron, a prince of the army of Syria, heard say that Judas had gathered unto him a multitude and company of the faithful to go out with him to war, he said, I will get me a name and honor in the kingdom. For I will go fight with Judas and them that are with him, who despise the king's commandments. So this is a continuing fight to oppress the Jews with the king's commandment to forget the God's law, to forget the Jewish identity, to forget the Jewish people's culture and their religion. And really what it is the whole Seleucid thing is a fight against God, if you think about it. So this other person, Saron, a prince of the army in Syria, he decides he's going to take a stab at quashing the rebellion. And he says, I will get me a name and honor in the kingdom, for I will go fight with Judas and then they're with him. And so he made him ready to go up, and there went with him a mighty host of the ungodly, so these would be pagans, to help him and to be avenged of the children of Israel. So looking at the Syrian battle, we have an article written from Wikipedia called The List of Syrian Monarchs. And it talks about the title King of Syria appeared in the 2nd century BC, which is about the time of the Hanukkah story, in referring to the Seleucid kings who ruled the entirety of the region of Syria. The term Syria was first applied by Herodotus in the 5th century BC to indicate a region generally extending between Anatolia and Egypt. With the advent of the Hellenistic period, Greeks and their Seleucid dynasty used the term Syria to designate the region between the Mediterranean and the Euphrates. In the article Wikipedia, the Wikipedia article entitled Antiochus the Great, it talks about Antiochus III, annexed the Syrian lands controlled by Egypt and united them with his Syrian lands, thus gaining control of the entirety of Syria. Starting from the 2nd century BC, ancient writers such as Polybius and Posidonius began referring to the Seleucid ruler as the king of Syria. The evidence of this title's usage by the kings is provided by the inscription of Antigonus, son of Mattahias, who described himself as the admiral of Alexander, king of Syria. So Antiochus IV, who comes after Antiochus III, who was called the king of Syria, he rises up and becomes the king during the Macabees revolt. So this Antiochus III, who was called the king of Syria, he is not the same king of the he's not the same king that oppressed the Jews during the Macabees revolt. He is his son. First Maccabees 3:16 through 19 as we continue through the story. And it reads, and when he came near to the going up of Beth-horon, Judas went forth to meet him with a small company, who, when they saw the host coming to meet them, said unto Judas, how shall we be able, being so few, to fight against such great a multitude and so strong, seeing we are ready to faint with fasting all this day? Unto whom Judas answered, it is no hard matter for many to be shut up in the hands of a few, and with the God of heaven it is all one to deliver with a great multitude or a small company. For the victory of battle standeth not in the multitude of a host, but strength comes from heaven. So I want to refer you back to this last part of the Maccabean verse that really gives the people fighting with Judah hope, and it's like their victory speech to say, we can do it. It says, for the victory of battle stands not in the multitude of a host, but strength comes from heaven, which in short means it does not matter what the size of your army is. It doesn't matter how big the enemy is. As long as you got God on your side, we can overcome. Going to the Wikimedia article called Beth-horon, and so we were reading about Beth-horon when they're getting ready to engage another battle. The Maccabees are getting ready to engage in a battle at Beth-horon. We want to talk about what is or where is Beth-horon. So according to the Wikimedia article entitled Beth-horon, we see it says it was an ancient biblical town strategically located on the Gibeon-Ashelon road, guarding the ascent of Beth-horon. Upper Beth-horon appears in Joshua 16 verse 5 and Lower Beth-horon in Joshua 16 verse 3 and 1 Chronicles 7 verse 24. And it continues to say it was a Canaanite and an Israelite city north of Jerusalem. According to Joshua 10:12 and Joshua 11:19, the pre-conquest inhabitants of Gibeon, the Gibeonites, were Hivites. According to 2 Samuel 2:12, they were Amorites. The remains of Gibeon are located on the southern edge of the Palestinian village of Al-Jib. So going back to the great speech that Judah Maccabees gave in 1 Maccabees 3 verse 19, like I said before, it gives this great declaration, a great victory speech by their leader to say, the victory of battle standeth not in the multitude of a host, but strength comes from heaven. And so this is a speech that the captain of the revolt gives his troops to encourage them to be strengthened in their battle and not to be overcome by looking at the odds. And so the battle belongs to the Lord is basically what's going on in this verse. 1 Maccabees 3:20 through 22 reads, they come against us in much pride and iniquity to destroy us, and our wives and our children, and to spoil us. But we fight for our lives and our laws. Wherefore the Lord himself will overthrow them before our face. And as for you, be ye not afraid of them. So the response of the Maccabean rebels in contemplating their defeat with the Syrians is very interesting, because they're contemplating their defeat while Judas is contemplating their victory. And they respond to Judas with their fear, saying, how shall we be able to fight so few, to fight against such great a multitude and so strong, seeing we are ready to faint with fasting all this day? And Judah Maccabees replies and says, it is no hard matter for many to be shut up in the hands of a few, and with the God of heaven it is all one to deliver with a great multitude or a small company. For the victory of battle standeth not in the multitude of a host, but strength comes from heaven. They come against us in much pride and iniquity destroy us. and our wives and our children, and despoil us. But we fight for our lives and our laws. Wherefore the Lord himself will overthrow them before our face. And as for you, be ye not afraid of them. That's Judas Macabees, captain of the revolt. Continuing on in 1 Maccabees 3:23 through 26, it reads, Now as soon as he had left off speaking, he leapt suddenly upon them, and so Seron and his host was overthrown before him. And they pursued them from going down out of Beth-horon unto the plain, where were slain about 800 men of them, and the residue fled into the land of the Philistines. Then began the fear of Judas and his brethren, and exceeding great dread, to fall upon the nations around about them, insomuch as the fame came out to the king, and all the nations talked of the battles of Judas. So here begins the legend of the Maccabees. Here begins the reputation that goes before the Maccabees in the battles to come, to release the Jewish people from their oppression. Looking at the Wikimill article titled Beth-horon, it says the Battle of Beth-horon was fought in 166 BC, and that's what we were just reading about in 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verses 3:20 through 26. The article is a reference to the Battle of Beth-horon. And so the Wikimill article, Beth-horon, reads this way. The Battle of Beth-horon was fought in 166 BC between Maccabee forces led by Judas Maccabee and an army of the Seleucid Empire under the command of Seron. The army led by Judah Maccabee had just won a battle against the Seleucid general Apollonius. Seron spread out his force in anticipation of the Maccabees' guerrilla warfare tactics. The battle resulted in a decisive victory for the Maccabees, who ultimately defeated the general's leading unit, killing Seron himself. The result of the Seleucid force retreated shortly after. Another force was soon sent against the Maccabees, which led to the next battle, the Battle of Emmaus. And so we will continue on with the Maccabee story, and we will continue on to learn about the revolt of the Maccabees in episode 8. So I hope you'll join me for episode 8 as we bring to a close this episode 7 of the Reboot of Hanukkah. So for now, I'll say shalom and see you next time on Reboot the Root.